I have the pleasure to welcome you to this very special evening, and it is special in two ways. Firstly, it brings together works made by our students in the course they took with Marion and John, with the late oeuvre of the much admired Spanish artist Francisco de Goya. At first sight, there may be little that connects the art made by Bard students in Berlin anno 2018 with the paintings and prints of a Spanish court painter who lived his life 200 years ago. But there is a formidable connection, and it lingers and crouches and drifts through history. It is the ghost of war and disaster. One of the students referred in his poetry to the presence of this ghost, as did Goya 200 years ago in his oeuvre. But there is another special that colors this evening, and it is a special of a very different kind, as it inspires and brings hope and also a deep sense of gratitude and joy. In a very modest way, we have been able to dissolve a tiny part of the spectre by making it less of a haunting presence for a number of students from threatened countries. What we celebrate this evening is the fact that we achieved our goal of matching 20 scholarships that will allow 20 students from Syria to study with us. This evening also stands for a heartfelt and gigantic thank you to the students who helped to set up the campaign, to the campus community who spread the word to their networks, and especially to the people who stepped up to make this vision come true, the donors from near and afar who heard our call and reacted to it. Some of them are here, and some of them are not, but for all of them, I would like to ask for a little round of applause. And I now give the word to Marion and John, who will introduce the evening. Thank you.
Yeah, a warm welcome from me and John as well, from John and me. And we are very happy and grateful that you actually made it through the thunderstorm and rain and all arrived here, especially when you are from outside of the college community, finding your way here to these outskirts of the outskirts in Pankow, Niederschönhausen is a challenge. We call this house the factory because we work in it. I learned that it used to be, before we started working in here, that it used to be a Reifen service, tile service. And its provisory setup, its charming unkemptness and its remoteness all point to how Bard College Berlin is able to survive. As an ideal place, I think, a place to think. In spite of, or maybe even because of the economic struggles that we are fighting all the time. So this event tonight is, as Bendetta already mentioned, is to say thank you and to celebrate that we have indeed managed to find the money to finance all 11 scholarships that were still not financed only 6 weeks ago. So 6 weeks ago we had to raise 240,000 euros. And thank you that we made it. So what we offer you tonight is an exhibition and some performances. While the largest parts of the liberal arts education is taking place behind the closed doors of the classroom with text-heavy activities on Platon and such, the practicing arts can be an opportunity to open our doors to the public and to show what is possible here. So let me first explain how we conceive the art that is displayed here. It's quite obviously not intended for the art market. And it is even more obviously not art in the sense that Francisco Goya's paintings are art, like high art. It's much rather a visible and tangible expression of thought processes going on. One could also say that these art pieces are an intervention. trying to connect education and research and knowledge and creativity, and in singular moments also art as high art, in order to respond to the needs and the questions of the global society in a time of fundamental change under the impression of the chances and challenges of migration. We want to influence the discourse about that with our own experiences here. In the liberal arts, there's a long tradition of combining research and artistic creativity. So this combination does not need to justify itself here at Bard, in contrast to other universities. John and I use the beginners practicing arts class, but other classes at Bard also engage with formats and languages that are not academic English writing, and have students shoot films or take photographs or do performances or engage in activism. Our reaching out to the arts has an epistemological background. It is rooted in the methodological knowledge that if we want to learn about what's going on with migration and migration history and memory in our time, we have to explore new ways of inquiry and new forms of cultural analysis, hybrid scholarly practices, and entrust ourselves to an experimental, processual, open-ended knowledge production. These methodologies have been summarized under the term research creation, and that's also the title of our class, by the media science scholars Owen Chapman and Kim Savchuk. Chapman and Savchuk make out 4 different, they call it families, of such practices. Research for creation, research from creation, creative representations of research, and creation as research. I'm not going to go into this. And there are, of course, lots of overlaps and combinations, and when you deal with, or when you see these projects, you can figure out how research and creativity are actually connected. But let me illustrate what that means by the example of our class on migration, on the memory of forced migration. So without the challenges and chances that I experienced since 2015, I would have taught the subject of memory of forced migration in German memory culture in a conventional way, focusing on the different memory communities in Germany and their changes in connection with events and experiences of forced migration over time. But in a time like this, and with the students that we have here, and that we want to have, and that we actually actively care to have, such a conventional class on this topic would be, we feel, a waste. So we have the chance to intervene and to challenge or to liquefy the composition of the memory communities in Germany altogether, and to work on the new connections that are here because we can see them showing up in the classes. So I teach the students some German history, I teach some memory theory, some historical methodology, and John teaches them some possibilities and skills to find right metaphors and to work with materiality. But the students themselves contribute to knowledge and experience that both of us don't have. Memories of forced migration from the rainy streets in Idlib, or from the border area between Pakistan and Afghanistan, from Georgia and Slovenia and the Missouri River, but also from the realms of the young and their completely digitalized communication and their new sense of social responsibility and individual identity, realms that oldies like John and me don't really have access to, even though I learned in the class that you sometimes go to the Berghain.
No, I learned.
So many of the projects in our class evolved around identity issues. Omar, where's Omar? Is Omar there? Over there. He started with research on the identity changes and identity problems of Afghan refugees on their route from Afghanistan to Germany, depending on their social background and experience in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Iran, where they come from, but also depending on the constraints and necessities on the migration route and here, when they, for example, have to fake their biographies to make an asylum case. So Omar did creation from research. On the basis of his academic explorations, he then confronted his own pain and eventually using his own blood to depict the wounds and scars of the damaged identity on the migration map that you can see at the entrance, and investing his own passports, it's the real passports he's showing there, to illustrate the existential significance of these pieces of paper. Miranda is over there. She came from reading Jewish literature from the 19th and 20th century to explore the continuities of the Jewish persecution experience and the Holocaust. And she ended up with images of death that you can see here on the wall. The death marches as epitome of forced migration. And in her drawings, she merged the human and the bird, taking up a motif that she had from Isaac Bardo. Theo, where is Theo? Here's Theo. Also read literature. He was interested in the memory of the Gulag in Dostoevsky's works that appeared to him forging his identity and present and remote at the same time. Therefore, he developed a painting technique in the paintings that you can see here and over there in the corner. A painting technique that uses background and foreground as a metaphor for memory and time in Dostoevsky's work. Mary, where's Mary? Mary. Oh, there. Researched the history of rivers in Germany as border landscapes, both fluid and solidified, and connected them to the river of her hometown in Missouri. And referring to herself as coming from north of the river became an expression of her position as a white American in relation to the global south. So quite a lot of projects in our class dealt with this problems of positionality and perspectivity. Lina, where's Lina? Lina? She digged up the widely unknown migration history of young mothers in her home country, Slovenia, the so-called Alexandrinkas, young mothers who went to work as wet nurses, nannies, and governesses in Egypt throughout several decades from the mid-19th century until the Second World War, creating undercurrent memory communities in both countries. And Lina worked with recipes and baking cakes, so I hope that you have the chance to eat a piece of the poticha cake that she's exhibiting out there, to show the intimacy of the passing on migration knowledge. And she created a wonderful film with a wonderful soundtrack that you also really, really have to see, because it might be high art. Lisa, she worked on the transmission of forced migration experience over the generations in a project about a Georgian mother. And Rafat. From him we took the title of the exhibition, I Am the Ghost. He developed a super impressive project involving his own head after having lost his language in the first part of the semester. And John and he will have a conversation about this once I have finished here. Tom, where's Tom? Tom, who's a gifted coder and programmer, and he invented a program to play with the multiple perspectives that one can have on the same migration numbers and statistics. And he built a game console in that room in the style of the 1980s to give this play a nostalgic touch. Esme and Bosse. Esme, where is Esme? Oh, on the floor. Yeah, they both in very different ways dealt with the social and individual responsibility that we are faced with. And Esme's work is a critical comment on the arts market's participants' indirect or direct responsibilities in the causes of forced migration and the fallacies of seeing art as a solution. And she has her installation in the workshop over there. Bosse will give a short presentation soon herself. Her work, Bosse started off helping Omar with his maps, with this Afghan migration maps, and then got entangled in a project again on the situation of the bystander, the onlooker, the one who's not affected personally, but looks for ways to affect and invest herself. And she'll talk about that soon. There are connections between these works and other works that have been developed in other classes of our college community, and it's up to us to identify them. And we have chosen the motive of the ghost to connect our works and also to connect them to Goya. And the ghost points to the realization that we are not who we once thought we were, which leads to an existential crisis that often goes along with forced migration. Joel is showing a film on his explorations of the Holocaust memorials in Berlin as part of a search for his ancestors who were murdered in the Holocaust without any trace other than a hint that they probably lived in Berlin. And the film is closely linked to an academic interest of Joel's in Holocaust memorialization in the digital age, and he wrote his thesis about that topic. And we looped his film together with Wafa's film, Wafa over there, who also explored the Holocaust memory, intimately connecting it to her personal story. Some of you have probably seen her film already, because we use every opportunity to screen it. But she made a new film this semester called The Factory of the Ghosts, and we'll show that in a second as well. And lastly, Sam. Sam is here, and he is a poet, a dichter in the German romantic sense of the word. And actually, he doesn't need our classes to be one. So I think that he's the master of all ghosts as a dichter, like a sorcerer magicking with language, and both in German and in English. And he will recite 3 of his poems that will connect or bridge us to Goya in the second part of the evening with Geoff Lehman and Norbert Miller. And now I hand over to you.
Thanks, Marion. Thanks, Bendetta. And thanks, everyone, for showing up tonight. And thanks very much to the students, too, not just Rafat, but to everyone, because it was a pretty amazing class this semester. I was totally excited not just to also be a student myself with a lot of the seminars that Marion was offering, and of course to go deeper into a subject matter that's completely foreign to where I'm coming from in my own practice. So in many respects there were moments where I found myself in the audience as well, or participating as a student, so to speak. But it was great to see how many different angles the projects went and how diverse the languages were developing, even for a group of beginners, mostly beginners, not completely, and seeing how it was kind of, at a certain time, I think we just kind of were guiding along ideas that were developing early on in the semester, and it was really after spring break, when things really had to kick in terms of production, which is where obviously the building, the factory, and what we're doing with the practicing arts side of things turned out to be, I think, a pretty good resource, and we were able to really try to bring this into something at the same level of other practicing arts classes. So what I'm going to do with my partner in crime, Rafat, we're going to just buzz through some images. This is completely unscripted, unless you have a speech to me. No, I didn't think so. I was just joking. I'm going to buzz through some images real quick to just show a glimpse of what was going on, at least with one particular project, which was quite intense, as I think some of you might agree. Early in the semester, actually, like right from the beginning, we were actually, I knew that what would be really useful is getting as much exposure to art as possible. We've had some wonderful guests, one who's here in the room with us today. Where is she? Yes, there she is. Sabina Hornig. I have to also say thank you, Sabina. For the wonderful talk you gave. It was really great. And also our faculty, Heba Amin, who gave a talk for us as well. I don't think Heba is here this evening. Nevertheless, we were starting with a gallery tour that went through different parts of the city, meeting artists, or at least talking to gallery representatives, and actually just seeing what's going on with contemporary art in Berlin, which is of course a fantastic place to experience art any time of the year. It was a cold February day, and we wandered through from starting in Schöneberg and ended up in Kreuzberg. I found this image of you with Clara Hobza's machine, which is actually probably where all the trouble started, because you were being merged with a snake.
With the snake, yeah.
Yeah, so there was a friend who made a friend of mine who made a machine that was actually merging portraits with animals of your choosing, and so already I think Rafat's transformation idea to transform began then. But we started talking, or I was having a lot of individual conversations with the students to kind of see, like, where are you at? What are you thinking? What are you looking at? What could be possible in terms of materiality, in terms of content, and where could this go? And this was well before the production stage, of course. We were really trying to hammer home at a concept or something that could be worth the investment, because unlike a lot of other practicing arts courses, the goal of this class was to have one project which you are experiencing here tonight. So it was different in terms of the production nature that usually happens at BCB with practicing arts courses. Nevertheless, we started talking, and he was very much interested in sculpture all of a sudden, and as a sculptor myself, I was of course excited to say, oh, okay, where can we go with that? And you wanted to actually sculpt a head at first.
Yeah, I was because it's a hobby since I was in Syria, so I want to sculpt it. But after that, you just start to give me the ideas and those great books. I don't know what should I say. Really, thank you. It was a great experience. I had huge knowledge from those books.
Yeah.
Robert Anderson, he's really a legend.
So actually, yeah, we were talking, but we were looking at books that were from my own collection, and just also thinking about what is possible in terms of a process, and of course with the limitation of one class in one semester, being able to become a figurative sculptor even close to Rodin's level is quite difficult. But we can look at Pablo Altamira, an amazing Polish artist. If we look at some images here, for instance, we see an example of Rodin on the left, and then two examples of Pablo Altamira, who had a wonderful show at Deutsche Guggenheim some years ago, involving mold making, involving taking the head, and something that actually can capture one's likeness without
Actually,
sculpting.
they just give me a new idea about a new project. I don't know yet, but yeah, his style with cutting is really great.
The workshop's right over there. We can just call it a night and start with a new project.
Next semester?
Next semester, yeah. So actually, it was Artisan that you really got connected with.
This
yeah?
This photo to the left.
Yeah,
It's
off the hook.
Yeah.
Yeah. Robert Artisan is not as well known as a lot of other contemporary artists. He's a San Francisco funk artist, or from a movement that was happening in the 60s, actually. He didn't become nearly as popular or famous as his most famous student, Bruce Nauman, who many years later became a bit of a godfather in the art world, especially in post-war American conceptual art, especially, but also working with heads and working with anything under the sun, actually. But Artisan himself, who works with ceramic, this was a book that I lent him, and I think Rafat just kind of fell in love with it. And
really great ideas of it. Especially this photo, represent a lot.
It's intense.
It's reflect a lot of meanings, and it was actually one of my ideas. But I didn't want to steal this idea, the knife in the bag, but it. A little bit a huge idea, so I was
no, it's intense, and of course there's a real it's a real visceral quality, almost cartoony in a way as well. But you went in a different direction with it.
And the sculpt, it's from here to in my sculpt.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So what happened was we came to the we got the idea to make a mold, or make not just of Rafat's face, which is normally what we've done with a lot of classes, sculpture classes in the past, but he wanted to have an entire head cast, which I had never done myself, and I was of course a little nervous, but I started researching and actually was able to have our wonderful studio manager, June Park, and Anna Zakelj, who's a student here at BCB, helping. So we had a team in place and actually really went through watching this video, how do we do this, what is involved. The reason I'm going to point this out or point out this project is because there's a real intensity connected to this, not just jumping into a process that's yourself as an instructor that you're doing for the first time, but his head became entombed for an hour. And what that meant was cutting off all senses and actually creating a situation where a lot of things could go wrong, which we certainly didn't want to happen. So it took a lot of preparation, it took a lot of planning and testing and research, and we arrived at this point in time, which you see in this image, where we were ready to go with the materials and having things marked down with a plan. I even went to the trouble of sending him a meditation app. I said, if you're going to be entombed for an hour, get this app. And I think it helped.
Yeah, it's helped a lot, actually.
Yeah, to learn to be completely out of your senses for an hour and to not panic.
Yeah.
We had actually...
to count your own breath,
yeah,
so many times during the whole process. It was really intense.
Exactly. And it was made simple. So here we are. We're starting the process. It's a messy process. It involves silicone and plaster and, of course, water and Vaseline and all these different materials coming together. I'm going to buzz through some of these real quick, but here he is smiling. He is still smiling as the green globby stuff is approaching his head. Here's where the smiling stopped. This is the point where actually, as a mold maker, you have to be actually really careful because, of course, the most important thing that we had to be aware of the entire time is that his nostrils were free. That is the moment when we'd have real big trouble on our hands. That was one of the technical things that, of course, was life-endangering or problematic, at least. But we worked very hard and very methodical to make sure that the nostrils were free the whole time. So, of course, doing the nose at the very end, right? Yeah. Here he is completely covered with silicone. Obviously the others are smiling and Rafat is not. There's this famous documentary that came out a while ago by Adam Curtis called The Century of Self, and I like to think that this is the selfie of the century, right?
It was really great work,
yeah?
Really great, yeah.
Well,
I felt like I'm in the safe hands, actually.
That's very kind of you to say, actually. I didn't feel like it was safe. We're getting to that. After the silicone, we have to apply plaster. This is where it gets complicated. Plaster is a very hard material. And then you have something soft, and something hard again. So it's going from plaster to rubber to skin to skull. And we have to be super careful working. If we make a mistake with plaster, again, trying to take it apart, for instance, that could have been a real difficult situation. Here he is we're totally finished at this point. Again, his only access to the world is through his nostrils at this point. So it was very intense. And what we had to do is we had to watch the clock. We were really everything was timed perfectly with Anna and June and myself mixing batches of the materials and making sure this thing was going as fast as possible, just like this lecture this evening. Right, Marion? So here we are taking everything worked out great into this stage. We're taking off the first half, carefully holding his head to make sure we're not breaking his neck in the process. This is where it gets really crazy. We're cutting a zigzag of silicone material. And I have to thank Lina, too, for, Lina, documenting setting, not just setting up tonight and helping everyone, but really also helping documenting this and just the whole semester being amazing. So before I forget, have to put that out there. Shout out to Lina. So here we are, and this is actually a really interesting moment. Actually, this is the point where I almost had to leave the room. We were removing it, and we were so well prepared. But as you can see in his shirt that he's wearing tonight, Rafat has a little bit of chest hair that kind of peeks up towards his neck, and it got stuck in the silicone. And I swear to God, I never was so scared in my life. Teaching, June had to actually take a box cutter to Rafat's throat, literally, to cut the silicone out and to make sure that, and it actually worked out fine in the end. There was no problem.
I was totally relaxed. I was like, guys, I trusted you.
Yeah.
In my hands,
I
I was
was-
like, just do it.
Actually, if you were, and we had a code thing, like at any point if we had to stop, he was going to raise his hand or clap or something, and like we would be ready for plan 2. Anyway, this is when his smile developed again, and actually it was just back to normal at that point. I mean, like we had our negative rubber version of Rafat, and Rafat was alive and well, and he lost a few hair on his chest, but I think it'll grow back. As you can see, it's already growing back. That was just stage 1 for the project. There was like many stages. Here's one of the casts that we actually had in the neighboring room where we were actually repairing a part of it, and he got deep into the plaster casting at that point. Was working outside. We see Boza also working, neighboring, and that's Tom in the background working on his project. You know, we were blessed with some of the weather after the break to be able to do this production outside. Here you can see what it looks like right after one of the casts were done. You made 3 altogether?
3.
Yeah. And here we are with the version that you have out there.
In the,
Yeah, exactly.
This is the last one, actually.
And even getting to this stage was just one stage of the whole project, because the whole video thing you managed on your own. I mean, I'm actually seeing it tonight for the first time in terms of the final cut, because there was a lot of changes that went on with this production, and so it became this whole all these other layers that you just took over at that point once you had the head.
Yeah, actually, this is like plan B for my project. In my main plan, I was attending to use my own videos and my own photos from Syria that I got.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, like my brother, since a week ago, he just told me that during our house bombing, all of my things just got burned. So I didn't get any of those. So yeah, I did this like as a plan B, and it's worked. So,
Totally. Yeah, I
thank
think
you
it
so
did
much.
too. Yeah, well, thanks.
So now we'll screen Wafa's short film. It's just a 4 minutes film, and then she will talk about it.
Memory is very dangerous. It's a factory of ghosts. I was on the edge of madness. I came to this city to escape big cities. I had no time for big cities. I was looking for a time for myself, a time to arrange my chaos. I walked alone among the trees of the forest. I thought and thought. I always thought of something, of a substance, a horizon, a philosophy. But I discovered that the problem is not in what, but in how I think. My mind is a camera. Its lens is inaccurate, and all its images are inaccurate or simply invalid. My way of thinking is the lens. How does my world look like to you? I don't know. The depth of the sea knows nothing about its shores. Your face is a shore. How do I overcome myself when you explode like a blue hole in the universe and return the blue light naked towards its home? By dancing? Maybe. My face is ashore. I fly in the blue skies like a metal bird. Nothing against me or with me. Only a thread of silk connects me to the ground. A wild rabbit bites the thread and I lose my place.
Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. First of all, I don't really know what to say, but I would start with my first video that is right there, and it is the video I made for Marion's class last year, and I would just say a bit about the process. When I first went to the class, I was not sure. I thought the class is like history, and in our first session, Marion asked like, "Why are you here?" And I would like to forget what did I say because I was not sure that was like very important. I said something like, "History repeats itself," and something like I was trying to be like I don't know. I thought like, well, like all these people, and I hardly speak English. Maybe I just like study my words and say something like very smart, and they would be like, wow, she's smart, it's fine. Well, obviously that was not that smart. But anyway, during the process, I was trying so hard reading all these texts. Very interesting, but it wasn't easy, of course. But then in the next semester, we had to develop a project regarding what we just read and studied. And first of all, I thought that I will do something regarding integration. Of course, coming from Syria, integration, it's everywhere, it's easy. But actually, it wasn't that easy. And because of that, I had to do some research. Of course, this like recent topic, there's no much research about this. There's no much knowledge, information. I had to meet some people. That was like a disaster. But eventually, two of my friends, Joella and Lina, invited me to be part of their project that was supposed to explore the Holocaust Memorial. Well, at first, I was really scared, and because it wasn't really easy for me as like I coming from Syria, knowing everything, all details about the Palestinian cause. Having a name of a Palestinian news agency, it was really complicated, and I thought, well, in Syria, I didn't really know about the Holocaust. I knew everything about the Palestinian cause, but I didn't know much about the Holocaust. So I was scared of doing this because this is something I don't really know. And plus, obviously, it's a very sensitive topic. And before that, I tried a few times to visit the Holocaust Memorial in Mitte, but I couldn't. And then I decided just to do it, and I thought it would be maybe easier or like less difficult if I do it with other people that are obviously my friends. And we actually did this, and we visited memorials, different ones. And the first time I visited the Holocaust Memorial in Mitte, I went by myself, and I spent 7 hours there. And eventually, Marion had to call me and ask me to just leave the place. Well, I wouldn't take the risk and describe what happened there, because it's really risky, and it's like I'm not sure that I'm aware of the whole thing. But anyway, my first, like, my aim was to explore the Holocaust as like this tragic event, but I did not want to separate myself from the topic, because this is like doesn't make sense. So I just let myself go through this, and obviously at the end I knew, or at least I realized, that I needed something. I could not express what I had inside for 5 years before that day without exploring something as complicated, as painful as the Holocaust. I did a lot of research. I read a lot. I learned a lot about the Holocaust. But I also, at the same time, I learned a lot about myself. And actually, because of this project, I was able to say what I could not say for years. Not even to myself, not even like inside my head. I could not say this. I could not think of all these stuff. But because of this project, I was able to do it. And it's like, that might be selfish, but like on a very personal level, that was like just a relief, because after 5 years, I just could hear my voice saying something that is really hard and painful, but it is reality. And eventually, for the first time, I felt that I could deal with my reality. And then after this video, I felt that, camera is a good, or at least like it's something I would like to explore more, because that was my first time holding a camera. And then now, this is a video I made this semester for another class about alter ego. So this is actually supposed to be not me, but my alter ego, who's like happened to look like me and think like me and suffer the same, but this is my alter ego. And and actually it just happened that I decided I was supposed to present like one day or one moment of this alter ego's life. And it just happened, because it's me, obviously, that I decided to show the moment, or at least try to show the moment where this alter ego or this character lost their mind. So this is supposed to be where like my alter ego lost their mind. But obviously, like the whole process with memory and dealing with memories and dealing with reality at the same time, seems really hard. I don't know, I lost it. But anyway, I'm just glad that I could, because of Marion's class, I could start this process and I could start this journey dealing with my memories. And now I think that I could say that I'm really interested in this, even on a scientific level, how memory works and everything. And I would like to thank many people. So thank you all. But I would like to say one more thing. Since we are here tonight, and I would use the chance of me being here and you listening to me, and say that I would like to honor the at least 60 Palestinian people who got killed during the past 2 days, and more than 2,000 people who have been injured by Israeli forces, and I would like to honor them, and this is the least that I can do, and thank you all.
Well, hi everyone, and thank you. I indeed was, what I did here began on last semester's class with Marion helping Omar. And it was in the end of the semester, and I was just asked to draw a map. And I didn't know what it was, nor what the class was about, or what it had to do, but it was really just easy, and I was asked to draw something and have a couple of figures. And I didn't take the time to ask what it was. And at some point, what struck me the most was that I was asked to put 2 passports in it. And when I was asked to draw the Afghan passport, I did not know what it was written there. And they told me just to do it as if it was a drawing. The thing does not have letters itself. And I felt guilty because I didn't take the time to know what it was, or I did not know how to ask exactly what it was about. Later, this class that was based in memory, just as the one that Omar was in, I encountered Marion, and I didn't know that she had seen the map that I did before, or that it was so related to it. But it felt that the thing to do now was to work with Omar and to try to combine what I know how to do and his research and his experience, and try to help and to transmit something where I would be able to do something where it was. But really fast, I started questioning what was I doing, and why was I making a map or something that I haven't lived and that I am not allowed to express or to explain. And I was asking how to insert myself, or what was the place, and what was the place where I was allowed to speak from, because I was not allowed to speak from a narrative space and try to tell a story that did not belong to me. So when I was doing the research for this, I encountered a term called lugar de fala, which in Portuguese that means the place of speech. And it's literally translated as the limit that shows where are you placed in the world, and how do you intervene in the world that you live in. And I understood that even if if I was trying to be aware of everything that happens around me, I could not put my experiences to tell a story that was not mine. And I wanted a space where I could at least give a thought to all the information that would come from. And nowadays, we're bombarded by information and by photos and by media that I saw before that I could not understand. And it's really easy to just look away and to turn around and to not pay attention to the stories. But it's way harder when you know the people. And it's a conscious decision that you just you decide to ignore. And what I was trying to do is to create a space, a room, a little universe where you had to do a conscious decision if you really wanted to turn away, and maybe you wouldn't. So more than anything is about thinking about the spotlight and the map with colors that have nothing to do with the nationalities or the flags or something that simply does not belong to me. But to let yourself stay there, admit that you don't know, that you want to understand, or that at least you want to give a thought on what is happening and stop being an onlooker. Yeah.
Hello, good evening. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank all of my professors, Marion and John as well. I'm not part of their class, unfortunately, but I've been asked to read some of my poems because they, as a refugee, I think they fit within the context of what we're talking about. My name is Sam Zamrick. I'm a first-year student of literature and rhetoric here at Bard. I came here as a refugee to Germany 2.5 years ago, and I'm a poet. A lot like many other persons, there are things that I want, and please bear with me. This is a poem called I Want. There are copies of the poems if you would like to trace along reading. Please pass them around. I think the rain has created quite a suitable atmosphere, I think, for poetry reading in the evening. I hope you all enjoy it, and thank you. I want late morning sex. 3 spoonfuls of sugar in my coffee. I want the tingling of senses beneath scorching sunlight, abstracted by breezes of Marchian winds, erecting every pore beyond its bearing. Darkness ails the soul, and I want the carnal. I want the sun to hurt my eyes and flesh. I am keen on all pain. I want cold flesh that melts against my breast and runs through my lunatic hair I let loose beside my aches. I want addiction beyond pain and the cunt, the ego and ash, the sorrows and songs and the years bygone. I want a sonorous voice to etch my existence on every edge. I want comfort in the breast and arm and all the small sensations secretly exchanged. I want hope elsewhere than in the bottom of a glass that shows only my unface. I want 3 spoonfuls of sugar in my coffee. Black, please, and hold the water. Coming to Germany 2 years ago, I figured I would never be fully integrated because I'm a first-generation refugee. And out of the same mindset, I sought to learn German as natively as possible. I wanted to learn the German language, to integrate fully into the German society and restart my life here as simply a person without nationality or any kind of bias, just a citizen of the world. And this is called Vorstellung in German. Armut und ich sind eine ewige Ehe. Seit Kindheit und noch fest zusammen. Wir sammeln einen gleichen Eindruck und ein gleiches Aussehen. Darum rauche ich, ja, trink ich und mich langsam tute. Als ich daran dachte, wie Mutter uns das machte und wie Dasein ist wie Schmerzen in meinen beiden Beinen, auf denen ich still stehe, um nach oben zu schauen, wenn ich die hohen Sterne im göttlichen Himmel ansehe, habe ich mir was vorgestellt. Diese Vorstellung war von mir selbst, von einem Stand des Wesens, wo ich Freiheit und verdinglich bin. Ganz ohne Ende, ohne Sinn. Da bin ich ja Unendlichkeit und ganzer Geist, schon lange vor dem Fall. Der Drang nach dieser Freiheit ist im Fleische angesperrt, zwischen Holz und Stahl. Auf meinen Körper guckte ich und er war aus Fesseln gewebt. Jeder hat eine Idee, jeder hat eine Farbe. Ich trat überall hinein, um etwas anderes zu suchen und verlöre mich in irgendeinem Fach, auf einem Brief, worauf einige Zahlen mich magisch aufgeschrieben haben. Der Schmerz liegt mir nun im zerbrochenen Herz. Der Drang nach dieser Freiheit ist ausreichend fest und schwer, dass sich die Menschheit nicht braucht, weiter einzusperren und ihre Adern auszuleeren. Ich darf nicht glücklich werden. Bin ich darum etwas Dunkles, trotzdem Licht. Und darum bin ich. Ich bin nur ich und was ich bin. Einmal einsam und hier eingeführt. Darf ich bei euch daneben meiner Poesieflügel geben? Ich? Einer von denen. Nur so läuft mein Schicksal und freut mich über Trauer und Tränen hinweg. Thank you.
Norbert Miller is a renowned literary scholar, a musicologist, and art historian, and a veritable Renaissance man with all his knowledge on the European arts tradition. He studied and worked in Frankfurt and West Berlin with all the names that the West German literary scene put up, lots of famous scholars that were like 1 or 2 generations before you. He was director of the Institute for Comparative Literature at the Technical University here in Berlin from the 1970s until 2004 and is to this day the editor of the literary magazine Sprache im technischen Zeitalter. And he co-founded the Literarische Kolloquium. That's an institution in a beautiful villa at the shores of the Wannsee, all dedicated to poetry and literature. And you should really go and visit that place if you haven't done so already. Norbert has edited the works of Goethe, Jean-Paul, and many others, and has written important monographies on Piranesi, on Horace Walpole, William Beckford, on the music of Romanticism and other topics. His most recent book just appeared is titled Marble Mania, on the European passion of the 19th century to trade with Roman antiques. And Romanticism being so close to him, I lured him into coming to this event just by mentioning Goya. So thank you so much, Norbert, for coming, that you agreed to participate in this. Geoff Lehman, most of you here know, he's a member of the faculty of Bard College Berlin, studied literature, philosophy, and art history at Yale, and received his PhD and taught art history at Columbia University. And he shares with Norbert this interdisciplinary approach to the European arts tradition. He's been teaching at Bard Berlin since 2006, and his main field of research is Renaissance painting. And he's especially interested in the relationship between the viewer and art and all matters of perspective, so that also fits to our class. And he just published, together with Michael Weinman, a book on the Parthenon and the history of mathematics and music as part of the liberal arts. And he also was lured into this event by just mentioning Goya. So, yeah. Thank you very much, and I ask now Geoff to start his lecture.
I'd like to look at a number of different images by Goya, maybe rather quickly, so that we can leave plenty of time for discussion. And for those that don't know already, Goya kind of straddles the 18th and 19th centuries and working as a court painter in Madrid, in Spain. But most of what we're going to be looking at tonight falls outside of his role as court painter or uncommissioned works. So I want to start with two images from the Capricciosa. The Capricciosa, which means caprices, basically, is a series of etchings with aquatint, so it's a print technique, that were actually published almost immediately after he made them in 1799. And it's basically something that's in book form. So you have to picture these as pages in a book. And these are two of the prints from a series of 80. And what I sort of want to indicate with this comparison, and with this topic of the ghost, the supernatural, in mind, on the one hand, in the Capricciosa, you see a kind of sustained social satire. And on the other hand, some kind of interaction with the supernatural. And I would say, well, this is looking ahead a bit, but even the metaphysical. So, for instance, here we see a people praying to what looks like a kind of either frightening apparition or almost like a Christ figure, and the caption, "This is what a tailor can do." We can sort of clearly see that this is just a tree covered by clothing, a kind of scarecrow. So some kind of critique of superstition, perhaps, but with these like sketched-in goblin creatures, right, that they may or may not see. But on this side, there's a print which uses this aquatint technique, which is a kind of a way to produce shading in a print, very sort of intensively, right, so that you have this kind of inspecific, almost impenetrable darkness out of which is emerging this strange creature, right? And here we have a sense of some kind of fantastical or otherworldly creature whose origins we don't know, but which is somehow emerging out of the darkness, right? So we can think of these as two aspects of the way he's engaging this, say, supernatural dimension of things. Or here, this is a very well-known print from right in the middle of the series with the caption, "The sleep or dream of reason produces monsters." This is actually taken from a frontispiece from Rousseau, this figure of the poet, but behind him these creatures. There's this transition, right, from the recognizable animals to these night creatures, one of which not only can we not judge the scale, but sort of seems to extend beyond the frame in the darkness. So, and this use of the medium of aquatint and of this sort of darkness to not only as a literal darkness, but as some kind of what I would want to call metaphysical darkness, or some sense of the unknown in relation to human experience. At the same time, he's playing with this, this question of, on the one hand, this is some kind of authentic, unknown realm, and on the other hand, something very theatrical, artificial, performed. Like here, for instance, in this print, it seems like either there's some kind of ghostly figure behind these goblins, or some kind of shadow cast on a backdrop. Is this on a stage? This is really just what I want to start with and move into his next print series. So this is really just to raise some of these issues. Here, for instance, this is the last print in the series. They almost seem, these goblin creatures almost seem ready to take off their masks, but we don't quite know, right? There's this ambiguity. Are these masks? What is the reality of this world we're looking at? In some of the prints, what I'm calling social satire and the supernatural dimensions are really merged in a way that we can't separate. And this looks ahead to, I think, where Goya's going to go in his next print series, because this is a woman being sort of forced blind into a marriage. But these faces behind, there's something more than just antipathetic observers. They're, again, merging out of the darkness, or are these masks, or are these ghostly creatures? Sort of invading or embedded in everyday life. And in a print, this is a really extraordinary print from the Capricciosa. A print like this, we don't see any direct reference to the supernatural. In fact, we see a very realist scene, a woman languishing in prison, right? And this is done almost entirely with shading, with aquatint. But where did maybe the supernatural dimension comes in? Isn't this impenetrable darkness? The sense that there might be a window here, but its status is a little unclear. How far away is it? Is it reachable? Is it really there? So a kind of, an inner, a kind of access to her inner world, perhaps. This is the kind of darkness that's going to, I think, play a crucial role in the next print series that Goya makes, which is called The Disasters of War. And this is a series that deals extensively with war and its outcomes, and also especially forced migration. This is also etching, so this was also published in a book form, but this was done in the 18 teens, and it was published many years later in 1863. There's less aquatint, there's more use of line. There's this almost obsessive, energetic line creating a darkness, which again is not quite impenetrable, but makes forms hard to distinguish. And what I would point out, this is the first print in the series, the way the darkness seems to invade the human figure. So what Goya is beginning to do, I think, with this series is the sense that the integrity of the human body is threatened by the environment that it's in. And if we read this, again, I don't know what to call it except metaphysically, right? That there's some sense of human being unstable in relation to the world. And that certainly, right, fits the desperate, pleading character of this figure, right, who's facing the reality of war, or at least presenting this to the viewer, sort of looking towards us. This kind of thing is certainly reminiscent of, this is a 15th century Italian painting of St. Jerome, of a kind of, there's a religious kind of iconography here. But I think it's doing something rather different. And the point of comparison that I think is more relevant would be Rembrandt. And these are two prints by Rembrandt, different states of the same print, showing the crucifixion from the 1650s and 60s. And here you see that it starts out this way, and then as he works on it, he adds more and more of these dark lines and this kind of frenetic cutting into the plate. This part here, where all the dark lines are added, most thickly is where the unrepentant thief is. So here, a kind of moral dimension of darkness, and again, maybe something spiritual, right? This is not just literal darkness, but the scratching out of the figure who is unrepentant, who is not in contact with the divine, right? And this kind of, both the technique of this like obsessive use of line and the sense of the darkness having this richer meaning is something I think very important for Goya, whether it be the print we've been looking at or one like this that seems to return to this sort of supernatural imagery, but here with a skeleton pointing at a sign that says nothing, and strange faces behind, emerging out of this darkness. Okay, second thing, so we're staying with the disasters of war for a while. The second thing I would want to point out, where I think Goya is doing still more to sort of challenge, I want to say, the human relationship to the world, and let's say some kind of human autonomy. And this has to do with composition. So it's not only the darkness, but if you look, I'm sorry that these aren't bigger, they're sort of hard to see. If you look at a composition like this or this, these are radically transforming, or let's say really challenging what we would think of as Renaissance ideas of composition, where you have the figures in a harmonious relationship to each other, where they stand and gesture in ways that express the soul. Here we see 4 figures struggling. It's not, none of them are really upright. It's very hard to read the relationship to each other, and it also importantly does not create a beautiful composition, creates a confused, kind of amorphous composition, right? This is 2 women fighting with 2 men, but it's sort of hard to see exactly what they're doing. There's just a sense of struggle. It doesn't quite go anywhere. The other thing, these are sort of 2 kinds of things that I think he's doing. The other is this very, I think, very moving image of a child surrounded by corpses and covering her or himself, and the sense of the single figure standing out against the background, but the background, we see the human figures kind of assimilated to the landscape, and again, they're sort of losing their definition, and she's the only one that's kind of still standing out from that ground that is threatening and is already also covered. And on the one hand, this is a kind of documentary art. This Disasters of War series, which Goya made right after the Napoleonic invasion of Spain, which ended in 1814, is, in a sense, a response to real events. And in another sense, there is that element, I don't know whether to call it the supernatural or the fantastical, which has deep resonance here, different than the Capricciosa. For instance, in this one, we see a similar kind of struggling going on. But in this case, it's some human figure struggling with a large animal, dog-like animal. First of all, it's not clear what kind of real scene this might represent. And secondly, it's a kind of purposeless struggle, right? Just kind of wrestling with no clear reason, right? A kind of struggling with the world in a way that has no obvious, let's say, human purpose, moral purpose, perhaps. So something like this, but even more, not more removed from just a straightforward, realistic depiction of something. This comparison is just to reinforce the point about the challenge to Renaissance composition, and how this is a kind of almost, I would say, a resistance to beauty, a resistance to aestheticizing the images of war. So, for instance, this is a comparison, maybe an obvious comparison, Christ being carried to his tomb after he died by Raphael, and this is a child whose mother has obviously been killed and is being carried away, and a similar kind of scene, but here, a more awkward composition. There's not this beautiful choreography of figures or the beautiful colors, right? Just this in-specific bleak darkness again, and the rather awkward carrying of the figure, right? So I would think of this as a kind of, in the face of response to war, a kind of resistance to making it too beautiful. And also, again, this maybe is just reinforcing the idea that you can look at many of these prints and see different variations on this kind of sense of like the integrity of the human figure in relation to the landscape, the sense of a kind of ordered composition which suggests an ordered reality, as a kind of a reality under rational control, is clearly being challenged in many ways. This is on this one I was on almost a humorous side. This is the horses all sort of tumbling down the hill. It says this always happens. Are these kind of struggling figures again, where it's not clear quite how we can separate one from the other, or what exactly they're doing, or a scene like this, which is much more straightforward, but where there's maybe some kind of rape going on, and at the same time he's either defending her or sometimes just himself ready to commit murder. We don't quite know what's going on there. It's kind of moral ambiguity, perhaps, as well as maybe pushing this idea of moral ambiguity a bit farther. I think of a comparison to another print series Goya did called the Tauromachy, the Battle of the Bulls. And something about this image I find extremely disturbing in its absurdity, right? The human figure who's been killed by the bull is just like hanging there off the bull's head. It's totally off-center. There's nothing over here. Everyone's rushing away. This kind of unbalanced, off-centered world where there's human role seems to just be kind of caught up in chaos, or where the meaning of the human figure is challenged here. It's just a lump on the bull's head. So one of the things that's striking about this series, so this is coming back to something I mentioned before, this documentary character, this is something that's made just a couple of decades before the invention of photography. And what we see here, I think, is a scene in which the figures are these are basically a bunch of priests that are lined up to be shot. And they're, again, it's not a beautiful composition. It's very straightforward. It's just there, just in a very ordinary way. And then the caption says, "One cannot know why." There's no reason for this. They're just going to be killed. And there's the sequence is striking because this is the next one in the series, and this one is similar in showing a kind of mass execution, but a little more aestheticized, a little more theatrical perhaps, a little more dramatic, with the main figure here, and then some hint of continuation beyond. And then you get to the next one, and here not only do we have an extremely theatrical scene, but this is a kind of classical nude, grotesquely, turned into a tormented corpse. But this seems to be like the range that Goya's working with. In other words, the awareness that on the one hand you can have this kind of melodramatic representation of violence, or just this very ordinary one, this very documentary one, which is something that I think comes out in a lot of these prints. And here again with the sequence, two of these much more theatrical images followed by a very ordinary one of someone just getting shot, tied to a tree, and then this one that we've already looked at where it's hard to even understand what the subject matter is. So I want to get, I'm wary at the time, so I'm going to move quickly. I want to just come back to this point about the immersion of the figures in the landscape, not in a harmonious sense, but more again in the sense of the human, the specificity of the human being kind of being lost, indistinguishable from this sort of formless realm of nature, like the way these bodies just, like, you have the figures, the only figures that stand out are the ones who are witnesses of the violence, and then the rest are just kind of merging into the hill, or, all of these in different ways show this kind of a rather troubling merging. Isn't that the same? Let's see. Okay. Yeah. This is a paint. Maybe we won't talk about this. This is a painting of a lunatic asylum where some kind of similar things are going on. But I really want to focus on this is a figure of this is a scene of a hospital. So like the picture we just looked at, a kind of a scene of kind of illness. But here, even more than in the painting of the madhouse, some sense of the figures kind of not easily separated from the kind like threat of chaos that surrounds them. The space is not very well defined. And this leads us to the images of forced migration. So this is a large part of the disasters of war show these refugees of war. And this image I find especially striking because if you look at this, you see a child clearly frightened of something that we can't see, that's out of frame. And these figures reacting as well. So some sense of an unknown danger, or something terrifying, maybe like something supernatural, like a ghost. But the caption also says, I saw this, right? Like, this is the documentary. I saw this. But what do we see? We don't see what they're frightened of, but we do see this long line of refugees stretching into the landscape, which is not supernatural. It's not dramatic. But this is maybe what we're actually witnessing. I mean, whatever this child is frightened of, what we maybe are asked to be horrified by, perhaps is this like long line of homeless people. So again, going in the direction of documenting real events, in a sense. Or here's another image of migration, where this is this sort of motif of the figures standing out, but against such an inspecific landscape. It's where are they? Where are they going? They're being led by a pig also. There's clearly a sense of, on the one hand, purpose. They're trying to get somewhere, but it's not clear where they could get to. Yeah, I don't know why it's doubling these. Oh. Yeah. I thought I had a big image of that. Oh well. Anyway, so we have to look for the little image. This is one of the most striking, I think, where we see they look like prisoners of war that are tied together, and here they're really kind of absorbed into this bleak landscape. So I put these up as a kind of contrast. On the one hand, you have some kind of very realist documenting of the disasters of war, and here it veers more in this, what I want to call metaphysical direction, the sense of the loss of human control or ability to stand out from the chaos of the environment, being lost, maybe spiritually as well. And it's kind of interesting that the one that's right before this in the series is the most supernatural looking one, the skeleton and the demon faces. And then it goes right to this, which is in a way just as maybe more frightening. Right. I'm trying to make this, well. One of the things that Goya did, so I'm going to we'll look at a couple more things, it won't be too much longer. One of the things that Goya did shortly after the Disasters of War series in the 1820s, he painted the walls of his house. Like, he painted basically huge oil paintings right on the walls of his house. The house is known as the Quinta del Sordo, the house of the deaf man, because Goya himself was deaf at this time. But this is like 5 meters across. This is the kind of stuff he's painting on his walls. Right? We see now in oil paint, not in etching, but we see this almost monochrome, formless landscape with the figures wandering through it. Now, these are not necessarily migrants per se. This is a scene of a pilgrimage, but very much the sense of of an exile, of a kind of wandering where we don't know where they're going to get to. And if you look closer, you see here's also kind of merging of this, what we saw already in the Capricciosa, this kind of supernatural, this fascination with the fantastical and the demonic, but also sort of embedded in a very real scene. Right? That are these ghosts? Are these real human beings? Look at these faces, sort of wandering through this landscape. Well, this is such an. This is another one from the walls of this house. The way the dog. I mean, you could almost see this as a comic image, but the way the dog seems to be either buried. I mean, either hiding behind a hill or buried somehow, but this disembodied head looking, where there doesn't seem to be much to see. It's kind of another way of being kind of lost in this chaotic field. And here, this is another one of the huge paintings from his house. Shows some kind of gathering where they're being led by a goat, right? So something sort of satanic. But what I think is happening here is different from the Capricciosa. I mean, this is clearly actually just a goat with some clothing on. So if there's something frightening here, it's not the presence of a satanic figure. It's something that, like a residue of the supernatural that informs the whole image. The way the humans are sort of crowded together, the kind of landscape they're in again. So even if you are a skeptic, rationalist skeptic, and say, oh, well, this isn't really a satanic figure, there's something frightening and rather out of control about the kind of world these people live in. It's a kind of emotional residue that's everywhere. Yeah, so maybe I'll go very quickly. This is the end of the series where he returns to some of these allegorical mythic images and ends with an image of truth surrounded by goblins. Will truth revive? And you could read this as a hopeful ending, right? She's shining the light. Or if you think about the Rembrandt etching, that the lines are closing in and gradually covering this up, and then you won't see truth at all anymore. All right, so just for a couple minutes, I will say a word about Goya's own exile. Goya, in the end of his life, went to Bordeaux and lived the last few years of his life there. And one of the things he did there was a series called the Bowls of Bordeaux. This is lithograph. This is a new medium. And with the lithograph, on the one hand, and that you might read this as a kind of nostalgia, because I think there is an element of like missing Spain, bullfights. But it also has some of this quality of the like going often towards the formlessness again, the way the human figures all merge. And the ones that have the most definition are the animals. So some of that sensibility of exile, not in the literal sense, but in the sense of the human being a bit lost in the metaphysical sense, is, I think, still there. And some of these images, and this is a painting from that period with the bullfight, where the way the animal stands out, the humans all kind of merge together and the animal stands out, has for me what I would call an uncanny quality, something very familiar that suddenly appears unfamiliar, like this print from the Disparates, another print series for the elephant. I mean, it's just a circus elephant, but somehow there's something not right about this, so rather strange and perhaps frightening. Okay. Maybe we'll end with a couple paintings from Bordeaux. One of the things that Goya does at the end of his life, he paints these little ivories, these little pieces of ivory he paints with tempera. So these are very small pictures. And all of these have this quality of the figures kind of emerging from darkness or maybe being a bit eaten up by the darkness, swallowed by the darkness. The way Goya made these, he actually he threw water on the prepared ivory, apparently, and it created random patterns. This is right out of Leonardo da Vinci, Leonardo who writes that you can see landscapes and figures in random patterns of smoke and stains on the wall. I mean, Goya actually does this. So here's this, in a very real sense, in terms of the way he made it, this interplay between the sort of random and the chaotic and the human figure. So these figures were painted out of those random stains. And in some cases, like this one, it really sort of loses definition, so you get that sense again of the almost being lost in the environment quality. This is the 1820s. In 10 years, this is 10 years before the invention of photography, basically, and even just a few years before the first photographs. So I bring this in maybe sort of to suggest another way to think about the supernatural. The notion of a photograph, I mean, here's an early daguerreotype, and this is one of the first photographs ever taken by Niepce. The way, with a photograph, unlike a painting, the image sort of magically appeared. I mean, this is actually, it is a kind of magic from a certain point of view, right? That this image of the real, something very real, a person looking back at us sort of emerges from the plate, right? And this sense of this sort of ghostly quality embedded in nature, right? You get in these early photographs, it seems almost to be anticipated by Goya. And some more of these, we'll maybe skip this one, I'm short of time. But this one I especially like. This is Judith cutting off the head of Holofernes, and this is the biblical story. And very violent scene, but also another place where the human figure is being mutilated in different ways. I mean, can you even see where the figure begins and ends here? Maybe to end on a hopeful note, not just because I want to, but I think that if you look at the very lax works of Goya, there is a hopeful note. This is one of these ivory paintings where there's this feeling like we saw before of the person, like this sort of exile in the landscape, wandering, sort of looking out, and we can't see much of the world. I mean, it's the sort of unknown, what this world is. And one of the very last paintings, maybe the last that Goya did, has some of this similar quality, but I think a more hopeful character. But this is literally, this is a painting of apparently a milkmaid in Bordeaux. But to me, it feels like one of these figures who's, you know, maybe in exile in the landscape and kind of a bit placeless, but not, you know, we don't see exactly where she is. She stands out against the sky, but the tone, this melancholic tone, maybe a bit nostalgic, maybe a longing to get somewhere. It sort of reminds me, so this is the kind of comparison in terms of the visual form, sort of reminds me of this beautiful print of a giant in a landscape, where, again, the giant clearly doesn't belong in terms of the scale. It's kind of ghostly apparition, but, you know, kind of dreaming, more like a dream than a nightmare, maybe some kind of wish to be situated in a place that's not entirely real for him or for us. He's not entirely real, but, you know, striving towards that. And it can be all. I'll stop with this so we have time to.
Good evening, I am Norbert Miller, and I'm deeply impressed by your wonderful picture showing us development of Goya from his not quite early pictures, but of his great gallery of disasters of the war and his late fantastic pictures. And finishing with a few pictures of the late exile when he was in Bordeaux and before that in Paris. It's a very strange exile where he did go late in his life. He went after the return of Carlos VII, and when he had to be for a month in hiding, that he went to France somehow on vacancies, you know, with the knowledge of the king. And there he went, first of all, he went to Paris and did see nearly nothing. He came to Paris in 1820 to 24 to 28, and there was already the beginning of the Romantic movement in France that should have taken to him. He have thought, that is it. But for instance, he made not the slightest move to meet Eugène Delacroix, who was already in Paris since the same time, who was the rising star of the French movement. He painted his first famous pictures. He was even working in the same way as an illustrator, but he didn't. He was not really interested in the Romantic movement, so why should one go to Paris in 1820 if not to meet the Romantic movement? But on the other hand, it is quite easy to explain, because Chateaubriand was not only very Catholic in his outlook of the world, but also he was exactly the propagator of the Spanish Restoration period of the ecclesiastical movement in Spain. So he couldn't, by any way, he couldn't meet with the French. Only 5 years later he would have done that. Victor Hugo was there, and then the revolution came, and everyone was painting and writing about that stuff. He retired to Bordeaux, where he had started, and was there as a very old man, he was high in his 70s, and was there working on a new form of graphic words. He started when he was, what you showed us were his etchings, and she started with.
He went thinking of the lithograph.
Yeah, and he when started. Always nearer.
This one,
Right?
right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He returned partly to the etching, once again, like those famous four pictures of and then he tried to find a new medium of to express himself, and that was the lithography. It was his very latest, it was a very late invention. There were famous lithographs in France. It was part of the interest he had to go there, was to study that technique. And he had only then, he had tried it a few times before in Spain, and had worked in the usual way to have a ground paint on the stone, and then find a few graphic problems to invent it. The new technique was to write quasi with the feather stone on the ground, and he did it with the utmost punctuality. He was painting it millimeter for millimeter in the closest way, but on the stone. It was like painting what he did, and there was such a new possibility that he had not even thought before to do it. But now he made nearly as many lithographies than he had done at the same time with his own, not old-fashioned, it was his own way of doing etching. With the etchings.
The difference in the medium is really important. Right?
Yeah,
Very
you are
important.
right. That is.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that's very important in what you're saying about the lithograph. I mean, so I'm not sure everyone here knows how lithograph is made, and I'm not sure I do, other than having read about it. some people may have made lithographs, right? But as you're saying, it's like a very free process. It's like if you go from woodcut, and if you look at the history of printmaking, from woodcut to engraving to etching, each change of medium allows more. It makes it more drawing-like, more painting-like, like more free in terms of movement. And by the time you get to lithographs, it's completely free, and also has for me a little bit of an ephemeral quality, which seems to suit Goya, like that these forms are not entirely well defined.
Impressionistic.
Yeah, exactly. So it seems very significant, right, that he shifts to this new medium. It's suitable for him.
That is correct. And this is one of the. But I have no. So sorry. No.
How do you think that?
No pictures at all. So I have only to discuss your pictures. So we all off the lithography.
These are the idiosyncratic ones that I chose, but sorry.
Yeah.
I wanted to say one thing also about what you said about his exile in Paris, brief exile, and his lack of interest in the Romantics, or their lack of interest in him. There is a kind of delayed response, right? Because when the Disasters of War are published in Paris in 1863, Manet is totally fascinated, right? So Manet is an immediate respondent to Goya, right? But that's like 40 years later, right? So there's a generation of not paying attention, and then suddenly, right? So it's almost like more I don't know if you can call Manet a realist, but more the sort of realist strain of Goya, that you get this, right? Not through the Romantics.
There was nearly no possibility to get impressed by him.
Right.
It was really no. On the other hand, there were a lot of graphic publications on him during his lifetime. Works of his that were already known in Paris.
Oh, the Capricciosa.
The Capricciosa have been were known, and some of the French painters even copied him, copied his former work. The problem is, why did a painter and a publisher like him get not a grip on the early French? They must have known him already. Why did it? Why is that 20 years of delay of his?
He's kind of an idiosyncratic figure, right? I mean, I think of like until the time of the Capricciosa, he's working in more or less an 18th century style for the court, right? Although I think that like the quasi-nihilistic aspect of Goya is already there in a way, but right. But I feel like after the Capricciosa, and the period that we're looking at today, he's really kind of on his own, right? And he's doing his own. It's hard to. He's not really connected to, right, a school of painting the way he might have been before, and it makes him kind of very hard to classify, or hard to, maybe that might be something to do with why there wasn't such a direct connection to other painters of the time.
And no one had the possibility to enter the Casa del Sol.
Right. Right, and he was doing a lot of stuff for himself.
No one else knew. We are convinced that that is the highest level that could ever attain.
Right, but I don't think in the 1820s people would have taken that seriously. Bizarre images that he painted on the walls. It's true, but these are the ironies of the sort of like formation of a canon, right, of art history, because this like stuff that was completely outside the mainstream that no one would have commissioned is now what and not the more mainstream stuff from Spain. So right, so kind of historical irony. But the graphic books are different, right? Because they're all widely known.